Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks a lot for joining our talk. I'm Maria Ristic, Executive Director of Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. We are a network of 7 organizations working in Southeast and Central Europe, focusing on media freedom and freedom of speech. We're based in Sarajevo. So we have this session that is called whether we should ban the revisionism on social media, in particular discussion around the denial of Holocaust and genocide. And basically the idea for this is coming from Birn, but we also have fantastic speakers with us coming from different parts of the world, and together we will look at the odds of the current policies introduced by different social media networks and platforms to ban this type of speech. This became particularly relevant for Bosnia and Herzegovina because country introduced sanctioning genocide denial as part of their criminal code. However, the introduction of the legislation led the country to a political crisis that is in a way still ongoing. At the same time, or we could say in parallel, Google and Twitter pledged to sanction the denial of Srebrenica genocide, but the implementation of the community rules is still very limited. In general, their policy around banning Srebrenica genocide denial was centered around their hate speech policies that prohibit content that minimizes organized, well-documented violent event. I'm quoting. Also, we asked as an organization, Facebook, who didn't want to give the official statement on the initiative to ban Srebrenica genocide denial, but also, similar like Google and Twitter, pointed out that there are already policies that prohibit the praise of any hate crime or mass murder. In the same time, back then it was Facebook, now it's Meta. They banned the Holocaust denial from 2020 on its network, removing or pledging to remove the content related to Holocaust denial. And I spoke about Bosnia, but that is definitely not an isolated case. From Poland to Croatia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, hate speech, instigation of violence, and denial of crimes online are basically a new normality and led in numerous cases to offline violence and incidents. So our main question today, is the policy on paper actually a policy? And as I said, I have a fantastic panel with me who will be discussing this topic. We have Sanjana Hatotuba, who is our friend and has been working with us in the Balkans now already a long time ago, but has experience in training different civil society groups and media from Bosnia to Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and many other countries. Now he's in New Zealand, where he finished his PhD on social media and politics, and he's also a special advisor for peace at the ICT for Peace, or special advisor for technology, but Sanjana will correct me. We also have Imer Muhovic, who is joining us from Sarajevo. Imer is actually an engineer and works in the IT company, but he also spends his free time researching Srebrenica genocide from the data perspective and how this actually shows up in the social media. We also have Stefania Koskova, who is from Slovakia, but currently in Portugal. We also worked quite a lot with Stefania. She was also in Bosnia quite a long time ago as well, initiating the first hate speech platform or hate speech monitoring platform for the OSCE, and then moved to work for Commission for International Justice and Accountability. But beyond that, she was also a Mozilla Fellow and worked a lot on the policies around content removal, from terrorism content to the violent content in general. And last but not least, my dear colleague Sven, who is our reporter, but currently is working on his PhD in Ireland, focusing on the role of Croatia and war veterans in the last Balkan War, or the Yugoslav War in the 1990s. So I will actually give the floor to Sanjana, who in a way from all of us has most global experience to in general tell us about the trends or the ideas around removing the content or introducing policies that are removing the content that is violent and in a way has revisionist nature.
Thank you very much, Maria. Wonderful to be with you on this panel, and Stefania and my colleagues as well. Good to see you guys. It's complicated. And so viewers who want an easy answer will be disappointed. So I'm telling that straight up. And it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs that we are still talking about the degree to which things are not okay and don't seem to be going right either in 2022. Let me just also begin by saying that while I find that I think, the world finds Holocaust denial absolutely repugnant and abhorrent, it is not the same as criticism of the state of Israel, which I think is valid, particularly around what they do to the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, which I stand by and stand with. And I think that distinction needs to be very clearly made, because the conflation can lead to issues of their own. And with regards to Holocaust denial, I think let's start with Facebook. In 2018, in an interview with journalist, American journalist Kara Swisher, Mr. Zuckerberg said something quite extraordinary. And I quote from this interview, the transcript of the interview, and I quote Mr. Zuckerberg saying, I find that, he was asked about Holocaust denialism. And remember, he's a Jew. So he admitted that he's a Jew and went on to say, and I quote, I find that deeply offensive. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that our platform should take down content around Holocaust denial, because I think there are things that different people feel differently about. I don't think they are getting it intentionally wrong. And he was asked about that by Swisher immediately. And then he said that it's difficult to impugn intent. And of course, this led to a lot of controversy, as you can imagine, because, even in 2018, I think that Holocaust denialism isn't very different to what we are talking about today. It's not as if, things have changed in 4 years. It's quite obvious that Holocaust denialism in 2018 was pretty much what we consider as repugnant today as it was for decades since the Holocaust. So it was quite strange that Mr. Zuckerberg took the position that he did. But lo and behold, by October 2020, the company did a 180. And so Monica Bickert, the vice president for content policy, I believe her position is, put out a blog post. Mr. Zuckerberg also put out a Facebook post saying that his, quote, thinking had evolved. And that's the first point I want to make, where people of my skin tone with melanin, but also people around the world who have suffered harms on account of crimes against humanity, atrocities, genocide, are direct victims of it, or have been hurt or harmed by it consequentially, including by its denialism, seem to be hostage to Mr. Zuckerberg's education. We find ourselves in this position over and over again with the degree of control that this one company has on allowing or disallowing this kind of content. So that's the first point I wanted to make, that the world community is hostage to a few in Silicon Valley, and in the case of Facebook, the education of Mr. Zuckerberg, to take into account that which we already know, either through lived experience or through a plethora of academic research. But here's the thing, by January 2021, the Anti-Defamation League in the United States gave a scorecard of a D, which is just passing, because even by that time, so 3 months after the announcement was made, there was still Holocaust denialism on, what we call Meta today, or Facebook's product and platform surfaces. And that's the second point, where Facebook didn't agree with the scorecard. And we often find that what the company reports at scale doesn't equate to felt lived realities of harm and denialism by individuals and communities in certain contexts, countries, and geographies. And so it gets away by saying that they have done X amount of things, and they always give a minuscule percentage of content that passes through what they claim are very sophisticated filters, but that doesn't reflect lived realities. So that's the third point I wanted to make. And we also know that now Facebook is facing $150 billion class action suit on both sides of the Atlantic, in America and the United Kingdom, against the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar or Burma, and the degree to which the company contributed to it. And this is going back around a decade. And that's where my experience also comes in, because in 2012, and bizarrely, although the world attention has been on Myanmar, Sri Lanka and Myanmar were twinned in the most awful manner, because exactly what was going wrong and on in Myanmar was reflected on the platforms in Sri Lanka against the Muslims. And so what the company is now facing $150 billion lawsuit around is extremely and sadly and awfully familiar to those of us who have been studying the platform and the harms that were germinated and propagated and spread and seeded on it in the same way in Sri Lanka. So this is not a problem unique to Myanmar. And that brings me to April last year, 2022, where the Center for Countering Digital Hate was quite damning in its report. It flagged Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube for failing to act on 89% of content reported. This is April 2022 on Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. It suggested that 530 posts had reached over 25 million views. So even in 2022, we are talking about a very serious problem. And I'll end by saying that it's not just the mainstream media, social media companies. What we're seeing today is actually quite a challenging landscape, where the migration, Maria, of the topic is on Rumble, Gab, Parler, BitChute, Telegram in particular, but also Substack and self-hosted WordPress sites and file repositories that I won't mention the names of, just to give it, I want to deny it the oxygen of publicity, but also, things like instant messaging groups. So there are a number of other vectors where a significant volume of harmful, hate-filled, vile, vulgar, violent commentary and content is being seeded and spread at pace. That things like New Zealand's Christchurch call, which all the global mainstream media social media companies have signed up to, have little to no control over. So Holocaust denialism is alive and well on this alternative ecology or ecosystem, if you will. So if the mainstream platforms disallow it, it's being, and you can only implicitly or elusively refer to it, it's alive and well on the alternative media platforms. And I'll end by saying that one of the very, very disturbing things that we are seeing out of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is an evolution in how the world thinks about genocide and potential war crimes and crimes against humanity. And we can talk about this a bit more, because I know that this is a question that you're going to follow up with, but it's insidious and it's very, very sophisticated, and it's new in that sense. And what we are seeing is the adaptation and adoption of the Russian model even in countries like New Zealand, to promote and propagate harms in a manner that gets Russia off the hook for what it is doing and has done since February in the Ukraine. So that's just a global snapshot at great violence, of course, to the complexity of the issue that I hope will lead to others speaking more to their respective domains and geographies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjana. I also remember that I forgot to say to everyone who is following this panel that you can also ask us the questions, as I understood, in the chat, and we're happy to follow up on that as well. So now going back to Imer, who actually did a research for Srebrenica Memorial Center around genocide denial narratives, I would say, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that included not just social media, but also the media in general. And you also analyze the people who are promoting distortion of facts around Srebrenica genocide. So I was wondering whether you can give us like just a brief overview, like what would be the key trends there. And also, I think very important is whether there was some kind of follow-up from the social media networks to actually sanction this type of speech.
Hey, thank you. So our focus, was generally to gather data about Srebrenica genocide denial, but we did find it particularly difficult to gather data from social media. Reason being that, for example, Facebook has limited or completely removed the graph search abilities. Basically, it was an API that would allow you to gather data from Facebook. That's after the entire Cambridge Analytica scandal, and Twitter has its own issues. It's still easy to like scrape data from there, but initially one of the ideas we had was maybe to like collect mentions of Srebrenica and try to compare, where those removed at a later point. But Twitter is very dynamic, and the people who use Twitter, they tend to disappear after a few months, or their accounts go inactive. So we decided to just focus actually on media and different websites, which unfortunately was very easy since in our language region, Srebrenica genocide denial is basically endemic. There are entire networks of pro-Serbian, pro-Russian websites that produce an astonishing amount of genocide denial. And we were trying to gather as much data as we can about the ways they deny genocide, who are the main actors, and basically what can we get on them. So in the end, we got this like lists of the media that either deny genocide outright. For example, if they write an article and, for example, if they quote somebody, then they themselves are not denying genocide, but they are providing a platform for genocide denial. But if they, for example, add something by themselves to this text, then they would also be involved directly in genocide denial. So basically, we got a list of like the top 20 websites and media outlets that either give platform to denial or deny genocide themselves, as well as top 10 list of most frequently involved actors in genocide denial. So mostly what we noticed that there are various ways that people deny genocide online. Like mostly it's active denial. In the case of Srebrenica, basically people saying there was no genocide. Just short statements on that. However, the second most frequent was trying to relativize what happened there, either justifying it or comparing it to some other acts of violence that occurred, trying to like say, hey, this happened because of this, which is genocide denial in itself. Third most frequent one was admitting a crime happened, but saying that it does not fit the legal definition of genocide, which is, I mean, completely wrong, since there have been 5 different court cases, international court cases, where it was clearly established that genocide did occur there. Only a minority of all of these acts were those in which there was this like support given to the people who were convicted of committing genocide or celebrating the genocide itself. So even without any sort of specific regulation, we can see that despite how, I mean, disgusting and vile this topic is and denying genocide is, people were still very careful not to put themselves in a situation where they could be tried for example, trying to incite violence. I mean, last year, we did get a law that banned genocide denial. However, it has the same provision as the free speech laws have. Basically, you can say anything as long as you're not inciting violence. And you can still deny genocide unless you are inciting violence. Out of this like top 10 list of genocide denialists, let's say, there were a couple of attempts to start criminal cases. However, the good example, I mean, like nothing has happened. For example, this man from Srebrenica, Vojin Pavlović from Bratunac, he's the head of an NGO, and there was an attempted court case against him for denying the genocide, since he literally has an NGO whose entire focus is giving support to Ratko Mladic and stating that the genocide didn't happen. But it got thrown out because the justification was, hey, he denied the genocide before it was legal. So now basically what we have a database of acts that are now illegal, but you can't really prosecute on them because at the moment it wasn't legal to do so. However, we did notice that after this law was passed, also Facebook and Twitter started implementing these policies to curb genocide denial. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of ways to deny genocide without outright saying it. And what we have noticed that these groups that are interested in denying the genocide, they have adapted new tactics, for example, for not saying it outright, or they replace like the sentence u Srebrenici nije bio genocide with like stars. So instead of every letter, star, so that was like one of their tactics of like not getting banned, not getting prosecuted. So while there haven't been any criminal consequences for anyone, you can definitely notice a trend of people steering away from the topic or steering away from outright denial, but still continuing the thing that they used to do before. We are currently preparing the data for this year's version of the genocide denial report, but honestly, I think only next year's denial report will give us more information if these policies actually had any legitimate effect.
Thank you, Imer. I just have one quick follow-up question on that. On the list of the people who are denying genocide the most, or are the biggest genocide deniers, what is that? Who are they? What is the structure of the group?
Mostly politicians, because the problem is that this genocide denial has become like a method of enforcing group identity, and it is impossible to have any level of political career without stating this. I mean, if you're in a pro-nationalist, especially Serbian environment, you have to basically be a genocide denialist to have some sort of political success. Then, and the second biggest group is activists, who are mostly people who are literally complicit in committing genocide, since this happened only 27 years ago. So there are still a lot of people out there with literally blood on their hands who are now trying to wash it off or justify it.
Thank you, Imer. Now I'm heading back to Stefania and you also gave us a good intro for Stefania to speak, because as I mentioned at the beginning, she initially created back then for the OSCE something that I think was called Hate Crimes Monitor, but later she followed a lot the policy development around content removal on a European level as well, not just the Balkans. So Stefania, I'm curious because, as Imer mentioned, there are always some kind of laws in place, but it seemed, or policies, but it seems that we are always missing something that will actually enforce this policy as it was supposed to be, or what was the intent of the policy at the beginning. Or on the other hand, and you wrote a lot about that, we have policies that just simply remove the content in bulks, but not clear strategies around what should be removed, what should stay, etc. So I throw a lot at you, but yeah.
I'll try to catch at least some of it.
Yeah.
Let's see how well I do. Yeah, so I mean, just yes, quickly going back to the history and how I started. Yeah, this was when I worked in Bosnia more than 10 years ago. Now we've started something called the Hate Monitor, which, by the way, the mission is still doing. So I think that by now the data is really quite good and quite rich. But I want to correct that this was not primarily focused on the hate speech and not on hate speech online, because even though back then already this had the growing tendency, and it was noticeable that, you know, what's happening online is kind of interacting with the previously known or tracked or monitored offline manifestations of hate. The goal was actually to try and connect these, right? So to map out what's happening at the community level, especially with a view of, and with the understanding that official hate crime statistics are lacking, and basically they don't tell the real story. So this was based on really like mapping all kinds of incidents, from graffiti to destruction or defacing of objects of significance, to just like verbal assaults and insults that have been either like responded to by the police or just reported by the media or in the community. So this was really like a mix of things, but the goal was not only to map, but to have some kind of basis to design some response strategies around it at the community level. And so, I mean, clearly this wasn't a surprise to anybody that places that experienced atrocities or events that commemorated these would attract this type of hate, would attract attention of the groups that had alternative interpretation of history, and so this became really like kind of the triggers, or just kind of magnets for this type of speech or behavior, and this was, as I said, both online and offline. And the interesting thing there, I remember when we were presenting some initial data to some embassies in Sarajevo, the feedback that we got, which was quite telling. And I think, I mean, I want to make a segue then to the policies. That's why I'm telling the story. It was the reaction saying that, oh yeah, this is really, you know, important and interesting, but currently we cannot support this initiative because we are only focusing on dealing with the past, and this is hate speech. And we were kind of like confounded by this statement, which is not uncommon, right? And that's
sorry, and now it's the other way around. So now everything is hate speech, but we don't want dealing with the past. So
yeah, exactly. And you know, fast forward couple years later, right around 2015, when everybody became very preoccupied with ISIS and with the recruitment into Syria, then this all came to be framed as radicalization and you know, violent extremism. But I mean, at the core, these are the same problems, the same issues. So we just approach them with these different, you know, terminologies and tools, and that's why it's sometimes also difficult to make sense of all of these policies, because at the core, you know, they are going after speech that is in some way considered either harmful or it's outright illegal, and it's, you know, could be criminal, like people can be criminally prosecuted, but you know, having denial, for example, in the criminal code doesn't necessarily mean that the policy on a social network to ban all speech that could be considered a denial is like a straightforward act, right? Because I mean, of course, the criminality has to be proven, and when you have a policy that bans something that's difficult to even define, it causes all sorts of headaches, especially with regards to, you know, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So these are the dilemmas that no matter whether you're talking about hate speech, whether you're talking specifically about Holocaust or genocide denial, or you're talking about terrorist content, these are the difficulties that platforms have to grapple with, and especially talking about these things on scale and in all these different contexts with you know, a very kind of that require very rich contextual historical knowledge to be able to even understand the type of speech that's present. So this was in a way, I think that this comes for me, or this became my kind of obsession, these two things. So one, linking this offline and online manifestations, and being aware that you know, banning or just focusing on online speech does not or might not necessarily have the desired impact offline. And of course, we also saw that, right? That these, like Imer was saying, these denialists would then use having their posts banned as kind of, you know, a matter of honor and pride, and like they're able to in a way capitalize on that as well. So then the question really becomes like, what effect are these interventions online having, and what kind of unintended maybe consequences they have, and yeah, and the second point that I, you know, I'm often, you know, perplexed by is still to this day that people think that these are kind of separate issues, that we, you know, need to deal with them in these specialist expert silos, and then so when you talk about Holocaust denial, then this is somehow like detached or disconnected from like terrorist content debate or hate speech debate more in general.
Thank you, Stefania. I will also come back to you later around the policy enforcement. But before doing that, we mentioned, Sanjana mentioned some other networks that are not so popular and mainstream, where we also have promotion of hate speech. Imer also mentioned media as well, and I want to next give the chance to speak to Sven, who actually did a lot of work on the Wikipedia and what Wikipedia is publishing when it comes to revisionism in relation to Croatia, but also like in general around this topic of revisionism in Croatia, which is an EU country, and there at least we are expecting to have some standards, but unfortunately we are seeing quite a lot of Holocaust denial, not just in Croatia, but I think this is a Central European wave in a way, also in Poland and Hungary and some other countries. So yeah, Sven.
Hi, thank you, Maria. So yes, the in Croatia the biggest issue besides denying the crimes from the 90s, mostly concerning the crimes committed against Serbs in Croatia, but also very specifically crimes committed against Bosniaks in Bosnia within the Croat-Bosnia conflict of '93. In Croatia, the biggest issue is the Holocaust and the genocide denials from World War II. In this sense, I would just notify that in this denialism and negationism of the Holocaust and genocide, that the primary targets of this denial are against Serbs. So sometimes the Holocaust denial, so the genocide against the Jews in World War II, comes as a kind of a collateral damage to the one that's solely focused on Serbs, and even more so, it's focused on whitewashing the perpetrators of those crimes. And this was the World War II Croatian fascist movement called the Ustasha, which then, by definition, by whitewashing their crimes, you basically always, it's a prerequisite that you enter Holocaust denial, deny the denial of the genocide against the Serbs, but also genocide against the Roma people, as well as the massive crimes against all the political enemies of the time. So in my while working in Birn, I mostly focused on Wikipedia. So in the sense of Wikipedia, we have a very specific situation in the Western Balkans, so that we have separate Croatian and Serbian Wikipedias, but we also have a shared Serbo-Croat Wikipedia, which was actually something that even the founder of Wikipedia, Wales, suggested should be promoted, because the language differences are basically can be they're not massive. It's basically almost a dialect difference, and therefore we have different Wikipedias which are kind of competing in their nationalism. But the Croatian Wikipedia was a very, very extreme case, in a sense that it was overtaken by the far right. This is not my kind of my assumption. It's even in the analysis of the Wikipedia. There was the whole study done after the whole case. So for almost a decade, the far right controlled the Croatian Wikipedia. And the primary target of that was whitewashing Ustaša crimes. And the biggest prize there was the concentration death camp Jasenovac, which was run by Ustaša in Croatia during the 40s, which was then basically whitewashed completely. So imagine having a Wikipedia article on Auschwitz which basically says there were no gas chambers. So, and that there were no mass executions, but only people dying out of diseases or poor medical conditions or poor hygiene or something like that. So there was massive denialism, so basically the whole story was retold. There were no facts included. Those Wikipedia entries, they were mostly focusing on those small negationist groups in Croatia, which were actually financially supported by Croatia itself. So Croatia tried to play both sides. So in a way, when asked, public officials will condemn this, but nevertheless, some of those associations that were triggering all this denialism were receiving state funds up till recently. And the Wikipedia was kind of picking up on all that and was becoming a hub for all the extremists there. So all the admins and everybody was taken by this group. And fortunately, a lot of media followed up on that. Birn wrote about this, and some other media, Croatian media and foreign media. And in the end, the change did came, but partially also because there was the breaking of their internal rules of administrating and of how they ran the whole Wikipedia, which was the primary reason for the removal, and not so much and not exclusively the things that they were writing up. And it was not only that denialism, but I think even from a perspective of view of legality, they were actually targeting specific people that are still alive. So we're not talking about some historic events or historic figures, about some, for example, intellectuals or historians. They would just open up their entries, and then they would basically slander them completely. So they would call them a liar, a propagandist, so something that's even that could be sued as libel, because they were really making up stuff about people. So it was very, sometimes at the moment, it was very personal as well, besides being very ideological. And in the end, all those admins were removed because they were breaking the Wikipedia rules. And the community established new admins, and now they're picking up the pieces and trying to repair all those entries, which were at the time really awful. For example, this entry about Jasenovic's camp was completely omitting the words concentration camp or death camp, and was using some very light words to kind of portray it, and removed all the historical sources out of the previous versions and so on. So now they're slowly repairing the whole thing. But the problem is that I think that the harm was already done, because you have generation of younger people that maybe Googled and now are confused. And having in mind all this conspiracy theories that are becoming so numerous and so powerful over the years, especially triggered by the COVID pandemic and now the war in Ukraine, that basically now some people who are seeing those change articles have a position that this is because the previous ones were true ones and they were upsetting the status quo, which is always by definition evil. So in a way, the harm is already done, because a lot of people won't be persuaded by the new entries because they were used to a different alternative history. So in a way, I think that the harm was done. I think the Wikipedia didn't didn't tackle this issue as they should. They were, in my opinion, they were hiding behind their own rules, saying that it's a community thing. We don't have nothing to do with that. You know, they're doing this themselves. But on the other way, they were paying the hosts. They were paying a lot of the stuff. So if they couldn't do anything in interfering into the material, they could just cut the funding and say, we're sorry, we're not supporting something like this. I mean, you can have your own private Wikipedia, call it something else because we have the copyright on the name, call it something else, and, you know, do whatever you want there. But we're not, you know, we're not giving our money and our infrastructure and our name. You know, it's their name basically. So, and in the end, as I said, the situation was resolved, but I think the harm was done on a more wider scale, and I think a lot of people were probably confused by this change, and some of them because of their bad intentions, some of them of just good intentions but being uninformed, and also, as I said, this whole situation of this conspiracy theories just growing numerous and numerous, that just help to kind of create an even more confusing environment.
Thank you, Sven. You gave me now a good intro, because we sort of, or you sort of said, but I agree, that Wikipedia somehow managed to address this. Not really, but somehow. And then what Sanjana said at the beginning really inspired me to ask one very difficult question. That is mostly to Sanjana and Stefania, because they work more on policy. Me, Imer, and Sven are more data people. And that is actually what should be the solution. Like, is a solution like a class lawsuit? Like, should we all do class lawsuit like Myanmar, and then just force the big companies to pay? Because we all witness different policies being introduced, etc. But as I said at the beginning, and for me, this is the most frustrating thing, you have policy on paper, but at the end, it's just policy on paper. So yeah, what should we do, Sanjana and Stefania? Or what can we do?
Steph, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I can, of course, I have a solution ready for you. So I'm happy to present it right now. No, I mean, of course, you know, like I think that these questions and are important to ask, and I think that they should actually, you know, like be the more important ones, right? Like talking about solutions rather than like I think that we've done a lot on like defining the problem, and I mean, still more can be done on understanding the scope and the size of the problem on all the platforms, because as many of you have mentioned, right, like this is one of the problem, that there's this like black box of like what's happening in terms of like nobody having access to the actual data other than the platform itself. And so like there is a lot of the push within the you know, policy advocacy field is more towards transparency and towards, you know, having data on what's, you know, how to quantify these problems in order to then be able to measure any impact of you know, policies and implementation. And so I think that the transparency is really good. And there is certainly like progress in that field from many different sides, but then I think what's harder is what's, you know, I was mentioning earlier, is to measure any impact of these policies outside of the, you know, in the real world, and there it's kind of, you know, it's not even clear if it's possible, right? Because there is, you know, so many other factors that come into play. So it's very, very hard to prove causality, right? And exactly when we talked about the criminality, right? Like proving intent, these things are hard. So I don't expect that we'll be able to, you know, do that anytime soon. But I think that it's important to keep that in mind for you know, when designing these policies, that there are like things that that should be measured as a, you know, as the implementation progresses. So maybe that's just like my initial thoughts. I'll give now floor to Sanjana.
Yeah, just building on that, and very briefly, I think we need to recall late January's the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution that didn't go to a vote, was drafted by Israel and Germany, that defined Holocaust denial and very clearly and explicitly called upon social media companies to do something about it. And so this is new, and it's useful, in as much as one can be skeptical about whatever the United Nations passes and, you know, all of that. It is still very useful as an instrument that can be used to hold social media companies and their product platform surfaces to account for what is now very clearly defined by 193 member states of the United Nations at the General Assembly. The other thing I think Steph, you know, hinted at is that I am not entirely convinced about technocratic solutions to what are socio-political issues that are decades in the making. Facebook didn't create the context and the causes for anti-Muslim hate and harm in Myanmar or Sri Lanka. These have been decades in the making. They are very complex socio-political processes that the companies and their algorithmic amplification of harm contributes to, but didn't result in the genesis or creation of. So I think we need to take a very nuanced take on this. And the reason I bring this up is that I don't think we can expect solutions to all of this from Silicon Valley. And if we are to do that, I think that we are going down the wrong path. I mean, when are we going to hold our own leaders accountable? When are we going to talk about our own education, our own pedagogy, our own syllabi, our own prejudices, our own bias, our own societal divisions that have contributed to the ideological frameworks and the beliefs and the perceptions that contribute to everything that we're talking about, that are now reflected digitally on social media platforms? So I think there needs to be an inward reflection around our own countries, communities, and contexts outside of technology, and also now amplified and umbilically connected to technology. So I think there is that thing that we don't often talk about, because Facebook is very easy to target as the company that we all like to hate, but we don't tend to think of these things as more complicated. So I agree with everything that Steph said, but I also want to end by saying that the social media companies, also not to let them off the hook, need to do more. There is a difference between paper and policy implementation. And what we see today, I think all the speakers have spoken to this, whether it's the leading social media companies that are part of the Christchurch call or others that have now come into being, is significant variance in the implementation of stated policies. And in some cases, for example, Telegram, the absolute absence of policies. So what the hell do you do then? And so it's becoming more complicated, but at least with the main social media companies, we need to hold them accountable for the implementation of what they never fail to say they're doing, but we all know they're failing to do. And that failure needs to be made public, because if anything, academic research also now suggests that a bad news cycle is what motivates these companies more than any kind of principled policymaking from within the company. So let's use that to hold the companies accountable too.
Thank you, Sanjana. We have 5 minutes. So I just want to ask quickly Sven and Imer, because I don't think we have time for any rounds of questions. Do they want to add something on this, or I should close?
Not really. I completely agree with Sanjana that like the responsibility here isn't really on tech companies, it's on society as a whole, and there really are no quick fixes for this huge societal issue, which has really, really deep roots, and it's going to take a really concentrated effort to help and solve these things, and I completely agree, basically.
Yeah, I would just once more stress on what Sanjana said about states being responsible. A lot of states have very clear laws on genocide and all. In Croatia, it even doesn't include only genocide; it includes war crimes, crimes against humanity, and wars of aggression. So here we have a wide spectrum of conflicts, from the Ukrainian war to the 90s conflicts to World War II, even some other conflicts, all over the world, which can be prosecuted in where, but the just our officials decide it shouldn't be done. So even when it's done in the public, for example, not on media, but let's say in the public, in physical presence, it's never tried as a hate crime. It's always tried as a misdemeanor, some orderly issue, not something that should be criminal, but something that you just pay a fine. That's it. So some of the mechanisms exist. We just have to have, the political will, but also this kind of the judiciary has to have an initiative to kind of really act upon existing laws and existing conventions.
Thank you, Sven. You reminded me now, and I heard that on one of the RightsCon debates previously, is that someone said that, and referring to the MENA countries, but I think refers to the countries that we also discussed, it's that it's very difficult to have accountability in the states that are worse than big tech companies. So you have to choose how to search accountability in the system that actually, works on impunity. It was established on the impunity and operates in the impunity. So the accountability then becomes quite difficult. But thanks a lot, everyone who listened to us. And I really want to thank a lot to Sanjana, Stefania, Imer, and Sven. Some of you got up really early. Some of you missed a lot of emails that I apologize for. Some of you stayed quite long, like Sanjana. So yes, thanks again. And for everyone else, enjoy the rest of the day at RightsCon.